Hello, and you're very welcome to Leitrim Daily's Book Club. My name is Mary Blake, and I'm here with our monthly book club. I have Orlagh Kelly and Hilda King joining me on this virtual book club, I guess you call it, and we will have contributions from Kevin McManus throughout today's show. So I'm going to go straight to Orlagh, and she's going to tell us what book we'll be talking about this week and tell us why she chose this book. Orlagh.
Hi, Mary. Well, the book that we've been reading this month is by Elif Shafak, and the name of the book is 10 Minutes, 38 Seconds in This Strange World. It's the story of Tequila Leila, and we meet her as she lies dying in a rubbish bin in Istanbul. And she's tracing her life as a little girl growing up to the woman who now has been brutally assaulted. She tells us her life. She's her own biographer, really, and she's tracing her life through her family, her early friendships, and the terrible event visited on her when she was very young, and what propelled her towards Istanbul as she grew up. And she tells us her life through her friends, her husband, her career, and what it's like to be an outsider and to live as an outsider. But what's very clever is she brings also the history of Turkey and Istanbul to bear and to the forefront within this book. The second half of the book changes tone a little bit as her friends navigate the reality of life without that link person and what it is to try and honor somebody when you are considered a nobody. I picked this book because I'd read The Bastard of Istanbul by this author before, and I was very impressed by the way she tells the story. And her characters are very believable, very real, and the smells and the sounds of that country and the exoticness of Turkey is very well evoked, certainly in The Bastard of Istanbul, and certainly I found the same in this book. So I was hoping it would be the same, so I was very happy that it was. So that's the reason why, and this is the book that we're going to be discussing tonight.
Interesting choice, Orlagh. Hilda, welcome to the show.
Hello, Mary.
And what did you think of this month's book?
Yeah, I thought it was a tough read. I thought it was sad, but I thought it was very revealing. I think Shafak set out her shop with the very dramatic opening, as Orlagh has described, of Tequila Leila being found in a rubbish tip, showing us the inhumanity, brutality and abuse foisted on women who have been trafficked as sex workers. And yeah, she gives us the life of Leila in a sort of a traditional Muslim family, bringing in all the folklore and the rituals, and a father who had 2 wives, all because this was allowed in the setting so that he could have a son, really. And when he has a son who turns out to have Down syndrome, he thinks Allah has been angry with him and he has to make amends, and everything gets much stricter, and Leila is rebellious and very angry. And at the same time, we're not living in a rural area. She's living in a city, and her friend Shannon is there, and she has access to Western magazines and news of the world and all this. So when she discovers that she's pregnant, and her family discovers she's pregnant, and she thinks her father won't believe that it's his brother, her uncle, that has caused her she's been sexually abused and raped. She decides she's not going to take this charade of a marriage to a first cousin, and she leaves for Istanbul. And that's sort of quite a focused view of women in this Muslim family in Van. And then the author takes us to Istanbul, and she sort of jerks us into a multitude of different lives, 5 friends. And I think she does this on purpose. You sort of feel you're going to hear more about Leila and her life, which we do, but she brings in these 5 friends who all have differences. They're mostly immigrants who have been shunned by their own families for their differences. So you have a transvestite Nalan, you have Humera, who was beaten by her husband, you have Jamila, who was outcasted in Africa, Sinan and Nalan, did I say? She gives us a whole view of how their lives intermingle, and in this part of Istanbul called the Street of Brothels, it's a place where tourists don't go, except of course if you want to show off to the Americans when they come, which is one part of the book. There's exposition of the hate crimes that are foisted on these women when sulfuric acid is thrown at Leila. Jamila gives us a very graphic view of when she objects to her captor. She's put in a cellar, and she talks about it being, we're broken like horses, and when our spirit is broken, we don't want to go anywhere. I think Shafak is trying to give us an insight into the lives of these people who are victims. And then, of course, the brutal murders, and how the newspaper of the day, and now we're talking about 50s and 60s, and maybe early 70s, into the 70s, the newspapers of the day saying, ordinary women needn't worry about this, it's only happening to prostitutes, where there's been 4 murdered recently. But out of all this, she shows us that, you know, they've lost their blood families, but they have what she calls, they have each other. I think she calls them water families. And the support and love and sharing that they do is the hope and the reason they go on and can survive this brutal life. I think the final part of the book I really liked. I love the title. Well, I love the name, the Cemetery of the Companionless. It's anything but I shouldn't love it, but I just think it explains so much of a lot of things in the book. It's the unwanted, the unidentified, the unworthy that are buried there. And I just love the way she's gathered, the friends have gathered. With all their inadequacies, they go through this quite humorous effort to bring Leila and give her a funeral. And you have, I think it's Zanab, sort of quite spiritual and talking about her soul. But Nalan is quite bulshy and sort of saying it's the body that matters, and she has to have a good funeral, and we'll never feel right about this if we don't give her a good funeral. And there's a whole sense of triumph in the end when they get Leila over the Bosphorus Bridge and into the water, which is where she wanted to be buried. So I've probably gone through the whole story for everybody now.
Yeah, that's great, Hilda. Thank you. I think it is interesting, and interesting that you say you preferred the second half, because I absolutely preferred the first half. I thought the first, and I thought it was like two different. It really felt like two different pieces of work, and I mean, I thoroughly enjoyed both. And although I have to be honest, when Orlagh suggested it last month, I thought, oh, am I able for this? Is this just going to be so traumatic? Because, you know, from the description, it's such a tough area, but somehow there was such lightness in it, and there was humor in it, and there was texture and colors and smells and celebration and friendship and love. So I was so surprised by how much beauty I found in it, and I'd be interested to see what Kevin thinks. So if we could roll Kevin's clip there, please.
This novel is a harrowing but evocative novel. I love the writing style of the author. The way she weaves the story is just amazing and binding. It's both haunting and profound. Elif Shafak is truly a master of her craft, and her book entwines both the darkest sides of life with slivers of lightness and hope, of spirit triumphing over the brutalities of human existence. This sort of writing takes you to the actual moments which are talked about in the book. She plunges the reader straight in from the beginning with the murder of Leila and the final flickering of her consciousness. She writes brilliant descriptions of life in the bordello and death in the cemetery of the companionless. The premise of this novel is so original. Leila at the start of the story is dying after being murdered. In her final minutes she recalls the events that led her to that point. Her dying recollections exposes the story, how she ended up working in a brothel in Istanbul, and how she found her 5 friends. This novel is absolutely multi-dimensional. Firstly, it's a beautiful yet brutal poetry of dreams and memories. heartbroken story of the society's responses to a girl who dreams of a better life, to becoming something. And in some ways, it's not just an examination of Turkish society or the Middle East, it's actually universal. But Shafak especially highlights the sexual violence towards women that exist in her home country of Turkey. The second part of the novel revolves around Leia's five friends. They had one thing in common. Somehow they're all kind of unnatural and undesirable in the eyes of society. But the novel portrays a beautiful image of unconditional friendship. They all are strikingly different from each other, but they become so close. And a quotation from the book: they were more vulnerable on their own, but together they're stronger. Elif Shafak illustrates her passion for the city of Istanbul through her incredible writing. The book portrays a picture of Istanbul over the years, affectionate but also disturbing. Shafak's prose is an ode to Istanbul, and in that she has succeeded brilliantly. Shafak's Istanbul is at the crossroads of modernity and traditionalism, of religion and atheism, of Europe and Asia. Generally, the book reveals mid 20th century Turkey as a corrupt, patriarchal, and bigoted place. She also describes Turkey and Istanbul, especially, as a feminine city. The city is almost like a character in the novel. In a quotation, she says, "To the women of Istanbul and the city of Istanbul, which is and always has been a she city." And also, she says, "After all, boundaries of the mind mean nothing for women who continue to sing songs of freedom under the moonlight."
Yeah, great analysis there. Great overview from Kevin. And I have to say, a lot of what he says, really, I really agree with him. And the universality of the book too was so interesting, even though it was so specifically Turkish, still there was so much familiar. Orla, what did you think yourself?
I'm very fond of this book, but I did think it was because of the tone shift. I'm with you, Mary. I actually had a preference for the first half of the book because I thought Leila's voice was so resonant and so strong, and the vibrancy and the survival instinct and the lack of victimhood that she put on herself. She never had that in her life. She had it in her life, but she never portrayed it as something to wear as a badge. And I thought her voice was clear, and I thought she was vibrant despite all the brutality and the violence that she experienced. She had so much hope. And I think as you said, that I think her character was very strong, and meeting the outsiders, how that worked, how they connected, why they connected, how they were friends, why they were friends, was really, really strong. I liked the meeting of her husband, the idea that you may work in a certain industry, but it doesn't preclude you from wanting love, from needing love. You may have been abused, but it doesn't preclude you from needing love or wanting love. I think it was such a beautifully told story about women's lives, even though it's very brutal. There's so many layers to this. Even when Hilda was talking, I was just saying, okay, there's so much to talk about this. The effect of what happened in her youth, how she was controlled, how the women were controlled, how you move on to your life in Istanbul, and the flick of how life changes on the turn, on the pin of a needle. Isn't there a phrase of that? And you just think it's so brutal for women, and that kind of idea that however hard life is, it's always worse for women, and particularly in certain societies and within a Muslim culture, it is very, very different. I mean, it's very interesting. The year when she published this book, Shafak, she was actually she's been banned in Turkey because she was writing about sexual violence against women. So she's banned for the very thing that she writes about, that I'm so impressed about, that really needs to be heard, So I think this is a very, very important book. The second half of the book, I will be honest, I felt the tone shift was a little bit too much for me, because I felt it was played a little bit more for comedy, and I was so involved in Leila. I felt so protective of her, and yes, I know her friends did too, but the tone shift was too much. But also, like Hilda said, it broke my heart, the cemetery of the Campanulus. And when you read about Turkey, when you read about Istanbul, the amount, and I mean, it is a real place, and the number of refugees who have lost their lives trying to cross that into Turkey, coming to Europe, who are now buried in the cemetery of the Campanulus. It's just heartbreaking, and the cruelty of life. It's and it's that's why it's so resonant, because it's so modern. But it's really interesting because as we meet Leila, she's dying, but it's 1990 and it still feels very contemporary. She's talking about Naland, who's a transvestite, you know, sex workers, Zainab 122, you know, all of these outsiders. We think, oh, this is just modern life. It's not. We've lived this. We know these people for forever. So that's why I think the universality of it, and it will last. Yeah, this is a book for me that will last. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. And I think as well with that second half, there were efforts at humour that I just don't think were pulled off, for my palate anyway. But yeah, I understood it, and at no stage was I, you know, dissatisfied with the book. It gallops along, and as Kevin said, she is an exquisite writer. Her writing was excellent. What did you think of the writing style, Hilda?
Yeah, I mean, she was so descriptive and evocative of the smells and tastes of Istanbul. You were there, you're in that old part of the city, the description of buildings. Yeah, I think she's so accomplished. I took down one quote when Jamila was talking about her situation, and how she said the descent when it started spiraled rapidly like water sucked through a plug, and that just for me described, you know, somebody one day you're sort of arriving on a bus into Istanbul with all the hope in your heart of changing your life for the better, and within 3 days you're sex trafficked and you're a prostitute, and there's no way out of that. They're imprisoned forever. I think she expressed all that terribly well. Sorry.
And it is interesting that she, because I think we have that in this country too. Is it okay to love your country and still criticize it? You know, I mean, we all have cities where people are hiding and there's an underbelly, and look, at Board Falch aren't going to be talking about it, but it exists. And there are people we have rejected in all our societies all over the world, and it's to the cities they flock.
Well, the society is, I suppose society is hierarchical. There's always going to be that, you know, that sense of, well, I'm better than you. And if somebody's coming in, well, that's okay. At least I've gone up a rung because you're lower than me. But I think that we do, people do, because they hide in cities. They want to hide in cities because there is this sense of non-acceptance. And I do think it is important that you can love your country. I think it's very valid. I think it's problematic if you love your country and aren't prepared to see its flaws and call out its flaws. 100%. I mean, that's hugely problematic, as we see across the country. I mean, even in, you know, democratic states or states that we would have thought, countries that we would have thought are as democratic. I think that's really, really important. Yeah, I think you have to show as a country that everybody is welcome, is my view.
Yes, and I thought it was interesting, especially at the beginning of the book. They talk a lot about customs and superstitions, and it reminds me, I mean, although they're so different to our own, but it reminds me of the kind of things that we listened to growing up and that our grandparents would have listened to, these ideas when the birth was happening, of all the different things. And she had a nervous pregnancy after having lots of miscarriages, and took all these superstition customs on board to safeguard her pregnancy and her baby. And I think that was so well done, and you really believe that these people believed that so fully. So I thought that was absolutely lovely and non-sentimental at the same time. So it was, you know, the book wasn't mawkish in any way or sentimental, I didn't think, but dealt with those things very well. And of course, as Hilda said, the giving away of a child, which is things that happened in this country.
but they were very three-dimensional characters, and that's why I think you're right in identifying there's no sentimentality here. The brutality is told and laid bare for us to witness and to bear witness to, and also to show us that even if you are, that there are people that live different lives, but they can live full lives, full private lives in a way, even though there's brutality exists, that they clung to each other for that very sense of it, rejected as they were by their own blood. They clung to each other like water, as you say, as you pointed out. Yeah.
And they were
Very
all
strong.
victims of something, I guess. And especially, I know Hilda said as well that she had been, that this character had been sexually abused by her uncle. And the way that unfolded, it was just heartbreaking, because you could believe it. There was nothing that she could have done about it. It was simple. She was very young. And I think that, her, the fact that she was rejected because she was a victim of abuse is just so heartbreaking and so believable, and has gone on in every country over the years. So interesting characters too.
And the way the uncle turned it around and said, "You were waiting for me every night. You were a naughty girl." And you're just thinking, oh my God, this is the way it's done, and we've heard all those stories in our own newspapers, in our own courts and everything else. And I was, just when you were talking there about in different countries and how we love and hate, can love our country and still expose these type of things. It's probably, one part I didn't mention was where Dali, the student, falls in love with Leila, and you get the students protesting. That's the right of protest is there, and it's suppressed in this book in Turkey. And until you can protest and right the wrongs, you can't improve your country or the things that are brutal and tragic and need to be corrected. So there's that whole political angle to her writing as well, that she's trying to expose that that's not happening in Turkey, and even today it's nearly going backwards again. It's with the current power that's in it.
Yes.
It seems so.
And even as we are talking about this, I'm so aware that this is a book that I would recommend to most readers. I really would. Even though it sounds, we're talking about it here, and it sounds like abuse and hardship and harrowing and murder, and it is all of those things, but it's told in such a credible and beautiful way, and it is not feeling sorry for itself at all. So I really do think it's such a good read, and I'm actually really looking forward to reading another one or two of her books, because it was I couldn't put it down.
Well, she's a political writer, and I think that comes out really well in her stories. And when we're talking about how you tell something, it's deeply, well, for me, it resonated for me because of her feminism and her activism, and I think that came very strongly through this book. She tells you such a strong stories of women, and when you start to suppress a society, and as we, you can chart it, like when you start the 50s, the way that you have to be as a woman, you can only be a certain way, and the need for a son and the need for a second wife to produce, this constant kind of transactional behavior all the time towards women, and that power brokering all the time. And that's why I don't think she doesn't do sentimental. She looks at it, but she has the most beautiful language to tell you the most harrowing story. And that's what it feels compelling, but it also feels very, even as you say, we're able to draw on our own experiences in rainy Ireland as opposed to the suns, the exotic smells of Turkey. The societal influences are fairly parallel in a way, you know what I mean? So it's...
Yeah, I think so. And I think that whole idea of she disgraced her family, and they talk about other people in the community who left in disgrace, and that seems to be a shame and what the neighbours think. There is an equivalent in Turkey, which is so interesting that it's happening everywhere, really. And I think as well, to humanize these people is such a beautiful thing. These people were misfits and rejected people from their own families and society, and still each one of them had such a spark to them, and was, it really shows that, when we see somebody on the street like that, there is such a story behind everybody, and how they looked out for each other and minded each other. And I think that was a really beautiful aspect of the book.
I would agree. There's a book actually just published this in the last month or so, and it's a pictorial book. It's called Old Ireland in Colour. What they've really cleverly done is they've colorized really old photographs, a lot of military, early 20s, early 30s, and it's like a light switch. You look at them and you go, oh my God, you look like me. You look like that guy on the street. It's so humanizing when you see people in color, and that's what she does in this book. She humanizes people. Doesn't matter what they are, how they live their life, how they identify. It's recognizing their humanity and their right to their humanity.
So true. And really, she tells little stories as asides that make you think, you clever, clever woman. This is so, she talks about at one stage when Leila was a child, that her and her aunt, who she thought was her aunt, freed an animal that was tethered in their garden, and the animal went off but then came back and had a need for captivity, and again, she throws these away, but at the same time they're said, and they're really important and beautiful parts of her writing. I'd be interested to see what Kevin said. We have another clip from Kevin there. Breffney will drop it in for us.
For there's a change of tone in the second half, as the other characters are brought more to the fore after Leia, the central character's death and her burial in the cemetery of the companionless. The first section of the book is exquisite. There are scenes of Turkish life and customs which are beautifully and vividly painted. In the second part of the book, the one negative comment I will make is that perhaps there's almost too much emphasis on the backstory of the 5 other characters, which does get a little tiring at times. Leia is the interesting and enigmatic protagonist. Her friends are quirky. Their characters are developed sometimes too much, and I would have wanted to know more about Leia herself, not so much about her friends. While this all enhances the narrative, it did take away from the shine of the central character. And I found myself in the second half of the book flicking back to the earlier part of the book to try and remind myself who these characters were, because it became a little confusing. I needed to understand some of the discussions and behaviours later in the book. Now, overall, Shafak's writing is fluid, and hence the reading is effortless. This also made the first half of the book much more smooth and interesting than the second half, the events of which seem a little bizarre at times in the second half of the book. Shafak explores themes of freedom and friendship, but also the difficult themes of prejudice, justice, regret, loneliness, sexual violence, and child sexual abuse. While the subject matter of this book is gritty and there's an undertone of despair, there's also hope, and the author shows the strength of friendship when faced with injustice and pain. Now, to conclude, this is an amazing book from a wonderful writer. The insights into Turkey, its culture and politics, are both illuminating and shocking. It's strikingly imaginative and original writing, which leads readers, I'd imagine, to experience a range of emotions and want to read more from this great writer. Overall, the book, in essence, possesses a brutal but beautiful brilliance. I must say, I love the book, and it's my first time to read a book from this author, and certainly I will read more, and I highly recommend it to anybody.
Yeah, that was interesting what Kevin said there, and I agree with a lot of it, actually. And I was just observing when he was talking about the cemetery of the companionless, that we have our own experience with our famine graveyards in this country and places where people were buried. Hilda, you want to come in on that?
Yeah, I was going to say we've recently heard over the last couple of years about the Tuam babies, where there's no headstones and no recognition of all those babies that were born, and just, I think they were put in septic tanks. They were discovered in septic tanks. So yeah, we have our own cemetery of the unwanted and the unworthy and the unidentified. And I mean, Magdalene Laundries at another level. repeat the same oppression and prejudice against women, and blaming them for situations that they were victims of in many cases. So yeah, we also
So
have.
we are certainly not in a position to tut and say, oh, Turkey, how could you let this happen? Because we all have our own experience of it. Orla, do you know, did she write this in English or was it translation?
No, she wrote it in English. She does write in Turkish and in English, but she primarily writes in English. Yeah, so she wrote this in English. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah.
I thought it was very interesting. At the end, there's a note to the reader, and in it she says, in 1990, there was an act passed, they call it a penal act, where if you could prove that the woman that you raped was a prostitute, you got a third of your sentence commuted. I mean, need I say more?
I mean, it is shocking. It is shocking.
And also, it's very interesting as well, just when you were talking earlier about in the 70s, Hilda, about prostitutes. Actually, there were only prostitutes that were killed. That was very much the case. Just because he died recently is the Yorkshire Ripper. And that was very much the police's tone of investigation. Well, they're only prostitutes he's killing. So, you know, don't worry about it the rest of you, like. So it's really the value we place on women's lives for the choices they're forced to make. It's interesting.
Yeah,
or victims of. Yeah.
Yes, very interesting. So I think we're all kind of giving this a thumbs up. I certainly would be. Orla,
yeah, big time. Yeah, big
and
time.
do you mark it? Kevin didn't give it marks out of stars out of 5, but I think he would have been up there. Do you give marks?
I'm not a great woman for marks, but if you're asking me for marks, yeah, it's a full compliment for me. Yeah, I thoroughly valued this book, value it enormously. Yeah, it's flawed, like most. You know, you're going to find flaws within it, but it's such a valuable and instructive read. Yeah, so it's a big yes for me.
Hilda.
Oh yeah, I think her exposition of all those brutalities and inhumanities against sex workers across the world is, you know, something we should all know about and read about. And it's 50% of the world are women, and you know, if we don't support them and see where they're coming from, so I would give it full marks too.
I would give it a 5 out of 5, and I never give 5 out of 5. So I thoroughly enjoyed it. And as you say, yes, there were flaws. Yes, there were. But I think when something is rolling along so flawlessly and so excellently that you just think, oh, it's not quite as excellent in this part, but I mean, really, it's a great read, and I would recommend it to anybody. And I was hesitant when I heard it was harrowing and it was about the death of a sex worker. I thought, oh, this is going to be a graft, but I didn't find it that way at all. So great stuff. So that's that book, 10 minutes and 38 seconds in this
strange world.
In this strange world. And it is a beautiful book that has gotten a great review from us here in the Leitrim Daily Book Club. Other books, anything else you're reading at the moment, Hilda?
I read A Ghost in the Throat by Doireann Grifa, which I thought was, it's sort of it's about Art O'Leary, a queena for Art O'Leary, and it's beautifully written and beautiful prose. I could just, it was like getting into a hot bath and wallowing in it. It was so lovely. But you know, I mean, it's a mixture of her own memoir of how she became so addicted to researching Evelyn Nee Connell's absolute devastation after Art O'Leary died. But yeah, it was, I just loved the prose in it. I didn't care what she wrote about it. It was just so lovely. Yeah.
I mean, a good writer is a good writer. Sometimes, you know, a story is one thing, but even a good story, not well written, it frustrates me. So
absolutely. Yeah.
What about you, Orla? I know the shop is opening again on Tuesday. Have you had time to read anything outside this book?
I read Snow by John Banville. Yeah, I liked it. It's very atmospheric. It's in the 50s. Brings it, and I'm not great for crimes. I'm not great for whodunits. Sorry, Kevin. And but I liked it. Yeah, I liked it for the atmosphere. I think there's a lot. It's interesting. It's very male. Oh, it's very male. But in saying that, it works quite well, and I took it for the story. There was again, there's a brutal murder. There's a priest. It's a bit like there's a priest in the library. He's dead. Call in Hercule Poirot. But no, it works actually. It's really historic. It's nicely. It brings in a different side of Ireland, kind of the Protestant side and their experience of life, and the Catholic Church, and it's interesting from those perspectives. So yeah, it was yeah, worthwhile. What about yourself?
So I've been I love the Jackson Brodie series.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Kate Atkinson.
Well, I love Kate Atkinson's books, and I find if ever I'm kind of stuck for a book, I kind of go to the next one of that. There's a lot in that series, isn't there, Orla?
Yeah, there is. There's 5. Yeah, there's 5.
And I mean, I like it. I don't like it as much as her other standalone books, but I mean, it's a goodie. They're good, easy reads, and they're a bit of a chuckle and a bit of a mystery. And yeah, I've certainly enjoyed that. What's Christmas is coming up, and I'm just wondering now, for those of us who aren't organised, what would be good Christmas presents, or what would you recommend for?
Well, I mean, as you know, Mary, I'm a very fussy woman in terms of personalizing it and tell me what you like and tell me what your taste is and who you're buying for. But there are some interesting books as always coming out of Christmas, because there's great publishing at this time of the year. Certainly in fiction, I would recommend The Art of the Glimpse by Sinead Gleeson. It's 100 short stories. What's it's interesting about this is that it goes all the way back to, say, Bram Stoker's short stories, Leland Bardwell, right up to today, Donald Ryan, Sally Rooney. It takes, and John McGarren is in there. It encapsulates in a way who we were, how we changed, where we are now through the stories, through the literature. So I think it's a really nice one. In terms of non-fiction, which is a nice reflection, is A Page from My Life. It's by Ray Darcy's a radio show. Reflecting on today, ask people to send in entries of 500 words just of a story, short story or a funny story, or something that you think he thinks or you think that might be interesting. And they were inundated with entries. And this is the output. And I'm sure you'll probably know somebody who has a story in it, and all the proceeds go to charity. So it's nice. And also, it doesn't take a lot of commitment to read a story of 500 pages. In terms of kids, the one that I really like, just think it's funny. It's called Kay's Anatomy. You might know him, Adam Kay. He wrote, he was the junior doctor that wrote This Is Going to Hurt. So he's brought out an anatomy book for children so that they know what's what. So here's your foot, what does it do? What's that growing in your eyebrows? Your poo and your puke and all the sorts of wonderful things. So it kind of demystifies the body for kids. So yeah, there's just a quick run.
They're great books. And I'm interested in The Art of the Glimpse. That is short stories as well, isn't it?
Oh, that is short stories. Yes, Sinead Gleeson has edited. Yeah.
Because it's interesting at this time. So many people have said to me that they like the poetry books, they like the short stories, because their concentration, it's just such a crazy time to be in. So that'll be a great one. And The Page in the Life. So they're 2 great ones that you can pick up and put down. So that is brilliant. Come here, have you a book to recommend for our book club for next month?
I do, and I hope your heart doesn't fall into your boots this time. This is called Traveling in a Strange Land by David Park. Have you read this? No?
No.
Hilda?
No.
No.
I'll just read the back of it because it's an easier way to. And I thought I was picking it because I thought it would be interesting because it's atmospheric. It's set around Christmas, and there's this sense of silence to the story. That's the impression I get. So I thought that might be interesting, considering that this year has been in a way a silent year for a lot of us about how we've changed our lifestyles. Anyway, so I'll just read you the back of it. The world is shrouded in snow. With transport ground to a halt, Tom must venture out into a transformed and treacherous landscape to collect his son, sick and stranded in his student lodgings. But on this solitary drive from Belfast to Sutherland, Tom will be drawn into another journey, one without a map or a guide, and is forced to chart pathways of family history haunted by memory and clouded in regret.
Ooh, very wintry and cocoony and
Yeah, atmospheric.
yeah, yeah.
Great.
What's the name of that again, Orlagh?
Sorry, it's Traveling in a Strange Land by David Park. He's a Northern Irish writer. You might have come across him. He's written The Truth Commissioner. He's written a few things. He's nice. He's a poet as well. So yeah.
So that'll be a nice wintry one for us to be reading. Great. Looking forward to getting stuck into that. Anything else do we recommend before we close shop for the day?
Sure, we could be here all night if we were at that.
I know, we could be here all night. I'm sure haven't we things to be doing. But yeah, listen, thanks a million. And Orlagh, your shop is open again. The doors are open for Christmas. So well done. The click and collect is still working, I suppose, of course. People still don't want to go in.
No, well, they're not left in. So we're back open on Tuesday the 1st. So yeah, that would be great. It makes life a lot easier, and I'm really looking forward to welcoming everybody back in again. Yeah, it'd be great.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, just before we go on a last word on Elif Shafak's book, I might have been misunderstood when I said I liked the second half that lifted it up. It was more the contrast. It wasn't that I didn't like the first half or I preferred one to the other, but the first half was there was so many brutal stuff that happened in it, and the exposure of the whole story. The second half I just thought lifted it up. So it wasn't that I didn't. That was all I wanted to clarify.
But it really did feel like a book of two halves.
It did. I agree with that.
Really
yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Listen, women, thanks a million, and thanks for Kevin for sending in his message. We just had a problem getting Kevin to come online with us, so we're hoping, look, at normality will be back at some stage, and we'll all be back in a room, virtual or otherwise, next month to discuss next month's book, Traveling in a Strange Land. So really looking forward to that. Thank you, Orlagh Kelly. Thank you, Hilda King. I'm Mary Blake, and thank you to Kevin McManus for his contribution to today's show. And we'll talk to you next month on Leitrim Daily's Book Club.